We live in a world of extremes. On one end, prosperity abounds. On the other, millions live in extreme poverty. Why is that? Why is eradicating extreme global poverty such a daunting challenge for everyone from powerful governments to NGOs? Maybe it takes a little more ingenuity. This week on Full Frame, conversations with changemakers who are taking innovative new approaches in the fight to eradicate global poverty. I'm Mei Lee in Los Angeles. Let's take it full frame. Well, astonishing new estimates from the World Bank revealed that 702 million people today live in extreme global poverty, meaning that they live on less than $1.90 US a day. Eugene Cho is the founder of One Day's Wages. Cho invites everyone to simply give just one day of their wages to the less fortunate living in areas like sub-Saharan Africa and Southeast Asia. Thanks to his efforts and supporters, the organization has engaged in nearly 90 projects in more than 30 countries and raised in excess of $3.5 million since 2009. Eugene is also an author and recently released his first book, Overrated: Are We More in Love with the Idea of Changing the World Than Actually Changing the World? Joining us to tell us more about his work around the world and how you too can participate in the One Day's Wages movement is Eugene Cho. Eugene, welcome to Full Frame.
Thank you so much. It's a joy to be here.
Thank you. It's great to have you here, and I can't wait to talk about all that you're up to. Well, first of all, I got to ask you, how did you guys come up, you and your wife, decided to come up with this concept of giving away one day's wages? Where did that come from?
It's a great question. I was on a trip many years ago, and I was in a country called Burma, otherwise known as Myanmar.
Yep.
And we're in the jungles there. And I was there to do some research, personal research, because I've always cared about issues of injustice and poverty and such. And I visited this makeshift village in Myanmar, and I walked into a classroom there. About 15 tables and chairs, makeshift classroom. There was this beaten-down chalkboard in front of this classroom. And I was drawn to this chalkboard because there was a poster. It was a collage of photos, and it was a group of photos of men, women, and children with missing, bloody body parts. And I was terrified because this is a classroom that was designed for first to fifth graders.
Yeah.
And I later learned that the reason why they had these photos were to teach these kids about the dangers of landmines. And it was sometime later that day when I found out that the salaries of teachers was $40 a year.
A year.
Not per day, not per week, not per month.
Wow, wow. So you were totally inspired by that one experience.
Absolutely.
Well, you went beyond that, though, didn't you? You decided to give up a year's salary.
Yes.
So you really committed yourselves. And I mean, okay, let's be honest. Your annual salary at that point was $68,000,
Yep.
right? But an entire year's salary. What did you have to do to make that commitment? Because, come on, Eugene, not a lot of folks would do that.
You know, I chuckle a bit because if I'm, perfectly honest, that wasn't the plan.
Really? Okay.
It wasn't the idea.
Okay.
You know, we spent some time talking about doing something, and I thought doing something may have been writing a blog post about it, hosting a little house party for friends to tell them about the experience. But it was out of that time of really conversing and praying that we had this conviction about starting this organization. But I think we're living in such skeptical and cynical times among people in regards to everything, including the work of nonprofits, that I thought it was going to be important for us. We can't ask people to do something we're not willing to do ourselves. Now, that journey took us 3 years. My wife, Min Hee, God bless her, she was on board with this vision. She was convicted. For me, it took me about 3 years to come to terms with giving up a year's wages. And I know that, as a pastor, I'm not supposed to say these kinds of things, but I like my stuff.
Right.
We have 3 kids that keep eating constantly.
Yeah. Let's not forget you had 3 small children at the time.
Right.
Yeah.
So it was really difficult, and I think if, I knew how difficult that 3-year journey was going to be, I don't think we would have done it initially. Yeah. But along the way, we just found enough hope and encouragement and inspiration among our families to say, let's keep moving forward. Let's honor, let's honor these convictions.
And to make that goal of $68,000, you were short $10,000.
Yes.
So you actually had to lease your house.
Yes.
And move out.
Yes.
To be able to meet that goal.
Yes. Again, not what we planned.
No.
It wasn't part of the Excel sheet. The funny part about this story, and I say funny, but during that time, it was probably one of the most stupidest decisions that I could have made.
Really?
I put up an ad on Craigslist in a moment of desperation because we were short $10,000. We had committed to starting the organization by October 2009. And we're running out of time. I put an ad on Craigslist basically saying, would you be interested in renting a furnished home, $10,000 for 2 months? And I did it because A, I was bored, B, I was desperate, and C, I thought to myself, who would be dumb enough to pay $10,000 for our home for 2 months? But I did this without asking my wife.
Uh-oh.
Yes. So you can imagine how she reacted. And she happens to be a marriage therapist.
Oh, no.
So she
uses like, what are you thinking?
She uses this as an example of what not to do as well. And
you got to take her immediately, didn't you?
A business person from the UK came in, saw it on a Wednesday, loved it.
Oh,
but his one caveat was, I need to move in by Friday. So this is Wednesday and Friday.
Wow.
And so we had my wife and I, a very interesting, intense conversation on a Wednesday night.
That's probably putting it mildly, isn't it?
Very mildly.
Yes, okay.
Yes. But, this was her vision as well. It was our vision. But it was a really difficult night, that Wednesday night I remember, because we invited our kids into our bedroom and we explained to them what we were going to do, that we were going to go on a 10-week field trip as a family. Okay. And I remember crying that night. Because this is not what I had signed up for, and I felt like a deadbeat father. I had failed my family in some ways.
Wow. Okay, but obviously they were on board because they sort of had to be, but this was the commitment you made.
That's right.
And here's the thing. I think when it comes to charity and wanting to give, this is what you talk about in this book that we're going to talk about in a second, is that it seems like people want to do something, but they don't want to leave their comfort zone. They don't want to give up things that they're used to. So what was that like for you? What was that journey like for you that, others might say, not for me?
Yeah, that's a great summation. I mean, that really does capture that season of our life. That book that I wrote, it's really a confession. It's not a how-to book. It's not a we're on top of the world, we got it all together. It's really a broken confession of what we experienced. And part of that confession is, like a lot of people, I have good intentions. I want to do lots of good things. I want to be a philanthropist. I want to make the world a better place to live for my children, for others as well. But I think for many of us, we somehow get confronted by obstacles and challenges, discomfort. Yep. And as a result, we tend to revert back to that which is comfortable for us. And that was the big lesson for us. And in some ways, we set out to start One Day's Wages to change the world. And I know that's a cliche phrase, but there's a lot of people that have that idealism. We want to change the world. What I did not know is how much this experience would change us. I mean, it revolutionized our lives in many ways, gave us a perspective of so many things, deepened our family, our marriage. I think our empathy for people locally, globally, around the world really deepened. So it wasn't just an idea. We were really embodying those very things.
And I think you touch on something that a lot of people talk about once they do commit to something charitable or volunteering or even something as simple as going to a soup kitchen for one day. They realize that they themselves are getting so much more out of it than what they thought they were giving.
That's right.
Right? So the change has to come from within, but also you experience the change, although you're thinking you're changing the world at the same time.
That's right. It's really a mutual, there's a reciprocity to this. And so when people say, why should we do this? Well, clearly there's need in our neighborhoods, in our cities around the world, and we have to keep highlighting those things.
Right.
But I think what's not talked about enough is maybe we need healing and changing. We need maturing and growing. It helps us to be more human.
Right, right. Well, there's so many distractions in the world now, aren't there? And it's making us a little bit more selfish, possibly, and sort of inward instead of looking around and seeing what reality is really about. Yeah, yeah. We have a piece of tape on some of the work that is done in Myanmar, right? So let's take a look at that clip, and then you can tell me what's going on over there. All right.
Recently, we travelled with our partners at MIA and World Concern to see some villages in Myanmar in Southeast Asia. There's a tragic irony here. Water is everywhere, yet very little of it is clean and safe to drink. We spoke with one mum named Sen Sen Moore. Occasionally she is able to buy safe, clean water in jugs, but usually she can't afford it. So Sen Sen Moore and her two daughters scoop up dirty water and drink it. It gives them diarrhea, parasites, and it could threaten their very lives.
I mean, this is the harsh reality of life in Myanmar for so many. So the work that you are doing through your organization, what difference are you making over there?
Well, we were spending some time in a region called Irrawaddy Delta, or Delta Irrawaddy. And this was the region that was devastated by Cyclone Nargis in 2008. I mean, we're talking about approximately 125,000 people dying in this region. We visited communities where they lost 80 to 90% of their entire village.
Wow.
It was really heartbreaking speaking with wives and husbands and children who lost loved ones. And out of this, I will first say that it was amazing to see how people were rising up on their own. Deep hope and courage, innovation. So it wasn't like we came in and saved the day. We had the privilege to come alongside and say, they're doing such amazing work, and to have the privilege to come alongside, to hear their stories, hear their hopes for their villages, their children. Again, it was so inspiring. So we're partnering with an organization there called World Concern. So we help raise resources, share stories, come along with local partners. And it was focused around water. And there's 4 areas of water that we were focusing on. One is just simply education around water and sanitation. And the second one is how do we repair water wells that were once built, perhaps by other development organizations or even by villagers, but that are broken. And then the other one is to build water rain catchments, to take advantage of the fact that there's rain coming down and to preserve that rain. And the last one is to build latrines, again, because water and sanitation has to always go together. And so we were working with 7 communities, impacting thousands of people. And so it's been such an encouraging thing to, again, be a part of what these villagers were already doing.
It's so nice to hear that they were already lifting themselves up in such a tragic situation.
Well, I think that's the key, that we have to tell people, because sometimes what's tempting is we make it in our desire to glamorize a story that it's the Western saviors coming in, and it's really not. You know, we have to really be careful about the stories that we tell. And there are heroes on the ground. These Myanmar villagers are doing amazing things.
And that's what I love about the work that groups like yours do, because it's empowering the people there, the local people there, instead of, like you're saying, you know, the Western world being the knight in shining armor type of thing. Let's talk about the donors, right? So since you started this, The response has been pretty incredible, hasn't it? From all walks of life. And in some very creative ways, people are donating their wages or at least donating funds, right? Tell me about some of the most unusual or creative.
Yeah, I mean, I'm smiling because it really does warm my heart. I mean, these stories are crazy. And, One Day's Wages, our strength is that we're an open source foundation, that we try to tell people whatever excites you, whatever intrigues you, any gifts or talents. So certainly there's people that are donating a days of their wages. We had someone donate half of their wages to us. But in terms of some of the interesting, creative ideas, right now, there's 3 brothers in a small town in Minnesota in the United States. They built what I believe to be a 34-foot octopus, a snow monument. Wow. And it was such an innovative idea that it was recently featured on NBC Nightly News. And they raised, so far, $15,000 from neighbors and passerbys.
Just as like admission or something?
No, just people who...
just donating.
Who've heard that these brothers are doing this because they want to raise awareness for One Day's Wages in one of our water projects as well.
Wow.
So $15,000 there. We've had couples donate their weddings, saying, hey, we don't need toasters. I mean, I think people are saying we would like them, but we're choosing a more generous path. And so we've had numerous couples from all around the world give up their weddings. What else? We had students in the UK, in Taiwan, in the United States, host races and 5K races. A team of women and men have climbed up Mount Rainier in Seattle for several years, have raised over $30,000.
Wow.
And one of my favorite stories is a 16-year-old high school student who bicycled around or across the United States and raised over $10,000 for one day's
16-year-old?
16-year-old high school student.
Wow. Wow. And I know there's another story where a woman actually donated her hair. She shaved her head.
Yes.
And donated her hair.
Yes. I don't know if her hair was made out of gold or what, but when she shared this idea with us, I honestly said, okay, do what you need to do.
Well,
but she ended up raising over $12,000.
No kidding. That's amazing.
Yes, May, you have nice hair.
Oh, okay. Stand back there, Eugene. Don't get so excited. No, but it tells you that how creative people can be and also how willing they are to make some sacrifices. Just a little sacrifices goes a long way. You said something, though, that struck me, and you said that you think that we may be among the most overrated generations in human history.
Yes.
Right? What did you mean by that?
Well, it's certainly a blunt statement.
It is.
And I've gotten some pushback from folks. I think it's simply to acknowledge 2 things. One, I mean, we are living in extraordinary times of extraordinary resources. And, for us, for me, for you, for us, particularly in the Western world, it's not necessarily a bad thing, but I think we have to simply acknowledge the fact that we're living in such affluent times where we have so much resources. A lot of folks don't want to acknowledge it because we're constantly being reminded we want more or need more. I mean, that's, in a sense, the whole seed of materialism. But the second thing is that we're also living in times where so many people feel empowered or drawn or compelled to do something. Lots of ideas, good intentions, but we stop when it gets difficult. And so it's kind of the merging of those 2 ideas that we need to pursue ideas and convictions and causes that we really care about, and not simply like it on Facebook, tweet something out.
That's right.
Or whatever it might be.
And that's what happens. You are bombarded with images and stories of all these causes all over the world because of social media. But then there's a disconnect in terms of, oh, I'll read about it, but that's kind of where it ends. Right.
In some ways, it's a call to go deeper. That we can be so surfacey. There's a terminology that's been used recently called slacktivist. We want to be activists, but we're kind of lackadaisical.
I've never heard that.
And so
that's funny.
They call much of this generation slacktivists. Now, I think it's a little unfair. I think the jury's still out. I think, the subtitle of my book, it should be pushed back on. But I think it's a question, we have to ask ourselves.
I'm curious. You immigrated with your family when you were 6 from Korea, and me also being Korean and of Korean immigrants. Did something about that experience, is that part of in your DNA that made you into who you are and wanting to do more to give back?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I came here when I was 6, and I mean, you know this, as an immigrant, it was hard.
Yes.
It was traumatic.
Yeah.
Came here, and in 3 or 4 days after, was in first grade in the public school system, experienced the feelings of being marginalized, otherized. And I think in some ways it always gave me a perspective of the margins, the outsiders, in some way, a deeper sense of empathy.
Right.
But what's also interesting about my story is it was a bit later in my life, as a teenager, I learned about my parents' story. They were born in what is now called North Korea. And this was back when they were children. There was only one country, one Korea. But they were what development workers call IDPs, internally displaced people. They were refugees, and they had to flee south. And they experienced such poverty and hunger. And hearing their stories and also learning about how people, both within the country but also from international countries, came to the aid of parents and the Korean people. That's a deep legacy. I'm moved by that. And I think about the rise of the Korean economy. Much has been shown, demonstrated to us. And I think we have a responsibility, a privilege, to pass that on to others as well.
I'm very moved by what you say because it's a very similar story for me. And so I definitely feel that also from my parents, having gone through that hardship. It has to be part of you.
That's right.
You can't not be moved by it and affected by that. So thank you for sharing that story. Well, Eugene, it was a pleasure meeting you. It's tremendous what you and your family have started this movement. And I'm so glad that so many people are jumping on the bandwagon to help you out. So keep on doing the great work that you do.
Thank you.
And once again, his book is called Overrated. Great read. So I thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you, Eugene.
Thank you very much.
All right. Well, coming up next, taking a stand in the fight against extreme poverty. Stay right there. From the front lines of the war on terror to the front lines on the war on poverty, Jake Harriman is fighting the good fight. He's a decorated military veteran who served 7.5 years as a platoon commander in both the U.S. Marine Corps Infantry and a special operations unit called Force Recon. Awarded the Bronze Star for actions in combat during his second tour in Iraq, Jake Harriman came to believe that the contributing causes of terrorism, disenfranchisement, lack of education, and extreme poverty must be erased in order for peace to prevail. Take a look.
Terrorists rely on an endless supply of desperate people living in extreme poverty with no other options in life. The only chance we have to see the end of terrorism is to end extreme poverty. Nuru is a new type of humanitarian organization that partners with rural communities in the developing world and other organizations to end extreme poverty together, one community at a time.
Well, after leaving the Marine Corps, Jake graduated from the prestigious Stanford Graduate School of Business, where he created Nuru International, a nonprofit focused on ending extreme poverty in remote areas of the world. Working in Kenya and Ethiopia since 2009, Nuru International has helped over 85,000 people lift themselves out of extreme poverty. It's great. And the organization's impact has gotten some attention. In 2014, Jake was named a White House Champion of Change, and in 2015, recognized by Goldman Sachs as one of the 100 most intriguing entrepreneurs. He was also recently named a Presidential Leadership Scholar, and he joins us now to share his goal of eradicating global poverty in our lifetime. Jake, welcome to the show.
Thanks, man.
Boy, you're a slacker, aren't you? Man, I mean, talk about this list of achievements. That's pretty incredible. And it's also because it came out of something so difficult for you when you were in Iraq serving.
That's right.
And so tell me about that epiphany that you had while you were there.
Well, it was early in the invasion, and at the time in southern Iraq, it was one of the poorest places in the world. There was no access to any kind of health care education for the kids, terrible hunger problem. And what had been happening as we moved through the south was that the regular Iraqi army was retreating to make a final stand in Baghdad. Okay. And Saddam was pushing his Fedayeen soldiers south, and they were going hut to hut in these villages, recruiting these poor farmers to fight us, basically saying, look, your children are starving to death right in front of you. Yeah. If you pick up this weapon and go fight these guys 10 miles south of here, we will drop off a bag of rice here for your kids every other week. Huh. We were fighting these guys by the hundreds and thousands. And that kind of set the stage for this one kind of momentous event in my life. We had just survived the first major contact of the war in a place called Nasiriyah. We'd been ambushed, and we pushed through the city and had dug in north of the city. And everybody was terrified. We were all scared. We were hungry. We hadn't eaten in 2 days. Oh, everybody was tired. So I got up out of my fighting hole, and I was walking the lines, kind of checking on my guys to make sure everybody was okay. And I remember there was like a very thick fog that morning, and I knew as the sun came up, they were going to start shooting at us again. And I looked up on the highway, and I saw a little white car racing toward our position. And they had just started putting suicide bombers in these cars to blow themselves up. So I grabbed 3 of my guys. We took off running to stop the car. And I fired a warning shot across the front of the car. Finally, it stopped about 50 meters out, and the driver hops out, starts waving his arms frantically and running at me. So now I think this guy's, he's strapped a bomb to himself. He's going to blow himself up.
Right.
So I'm yelling at him in Arabic to get on the ground. He's not listening. Finally, as I lift my weapon, I think I have to take this guy out. I look behind him, and I see a large black military truck roll up behind his little white car. 6 guys in black jump out of the truck, run up to his car, and start shooting into the car. And so this man stopped dead in his tracks, starts screaming, turns around, starts sprinting back to his car. And that's when I realized that, you know, this guy was just one of those poor farmers who was trying to escape across our lines with his family because he didn't want to fight. So I yelled at my guys to take out the Fedayeen, and I ran as fast as I could to try to desperately save this guy's family. And by the time I got there, it was too late. You know, I looked.
They were all lost.
I looked at the passenger's side. His wife had been shot in the face and in the chest. She was dead, and he had a little baby infant girl in the back. His arm had been shot off, and she'd been shot in the head. And then he was cradling the body of his little 6-year-old daughter who'd been shot in the stomach, and she was choking on her own blood. And I just thought, you know, in that moment, everything in the war kind of slowed down, and I put myself in this man's shoes for the first time. And I thought, you know, like, I have all these choices in my life. You know, what kind of choices did this guy have when he woke up this morning? You know, he could watch his kids starve to death. He could pick up a weapon he doesn't even know how to use, make some desperate attempt to cross our lines. He didn't have any choices. And that was the beginning of this big awakening for me. You know, I thought, we can't just kill our way out of this problem. You know, the problem of terrorism and extremism is such a complex issue. We have to start thinking about alternative methods to complement what we're currently doing. We have to start giving people real, meaningful choices to stymie the spread of a lot of these groups.
Sorry, I just got a little bit choked up from that story because it just takes it to that level that people don't understand. The loss and the sacrifice and the desperation that they, you know, feel. That they feel like there's no other hope, right? That's part of the problem of what's fueling the terrorist recruitment.
Right. I mean, we all want to take care of our kids. We all want to give our kids a better future, you know, and, you know, poverty doesn't cause terrorism, but it acts as a huge contributor that allows extremism and terrorism to thrive and grow and spread around the world. And so if we can tackle extreme poverty, we can eliminate one of the factors that allows it to continue.
Right. So, therefore, you saw that happen, then you said, okay, we need to tackle it from this angle, rather than, as you just said, we can't kill our way out of this.
That's right.
Right?
Yep.
So tell me then how that concept came into fruition. I mean, that's a pretty big task to take on, right?
Yeah, that's right. It was very daunting. So I remember I had many conversations with my unit, the guys in my unit. We talked a lot about this problem. We all saw that what we called a market gap, essentially. You know, you had guys like us, operators who were, DOD had in there trying to work in these villages helping, but honestly we were trained to take out targets. We weren't trained to help farmers.
Right.
And then you had aid workers who were very well intentioned, but they go in and there were really short-term solutions, more handout type stuff, not a lot of sustainability, and many of them were getting kidnapped and killed. So we saw this gap that perhaps we could have former operators like us who know how to handle ourselves, build a sustainable long-term economic development model for these villages. And that was the beginning of the genesis of the idea. And I talked to my guys about it, and we all got excited about it. And I decided to make one of the toughest decisions for me at the time, which was leaving my guys in my unit, getting out of the Marine Corps to kind of on this quest to build this new way of development.
Right.
And I got out and I realized I have no idea what I'm doing. Like you said, it's a daunting challenge, right? Extreme poverty.
It is. Yeah.
I mean, you know, we've been faced with extreme poverty for eons now, and so how do you think about it?
It's extreme poverty combined with war and conflict, yes. Right?
I mean, those focusing in really unstable areas, and so I didn't know what to do. I had an engineering degree from the Naval Academy, which I had never used, and I wasn't a Peace Corps guy. I wasn't a development economist. So I spent about a year and a half just researching the problem, trying to understand, okay, what's working, what's not working in the industry, and why. And my initial idea was I want to join another organization and help from the inside out. But I quickly found out nobody wanted to hire me. Apparently I wasn't hireable.
Oh, no.
So I thought, that's fine. You know, I'm pretty entrepreneurial. My father was entrepreneurial, so I thought I'll just start my own thing.
Good for you.
And that led me on a quest. I didn't want to just start a little project that was going to help a couple people. I wanted to build a company that could actually help impact this on a global scale. And that actually is what led me to business school. I knew I had to learn the language of business. I had to understand how to build a company effectively,
right.
Run on business principles, not like a traditional charity, but really run efficiently where we can leverage investors' dollars to create the furthest impact possible.
Well, here's the thing, Jake, though. It must have been difficult, though, to try to explain to the average person who hasn't seen the conflict, who hasn't gone through what you've gone through as a soldier on the ground, to see exactly what the problem is, right? So to convince investors and just even supporters, was that tough to try to explain to them what this was about?
You know, what I found in the beginning, I assumed that would be the case,
yeah.
And it hurt me in the beginning because I was going to Stanford. There were very few people at Stanford at the time, veterans who had actually been in combat, and so I was really nervous about opening up about my experience. But what I found is when I did open up and I shared my passion and the vision for what I was trying to do, people really rally around that. You know, I found that investors and just the general public, people rally around strong vision and passion for change in the world. If the entrepreneur, if the founder is driven and on point and they have this fire in them that can't be extinguished, people are really drawn to that.
Right.
And I found that is, I mean, and it's not just me. There's many people out there like me that entrepreneurs who have a unique vision to add something in the world that's never been done before.
Sure.
And so at places like Stanford, they really like the concept of innovative new ideas, that can kind of like break through technology. And I think the team and I that were working on it were really onto something really unique, and people saw that, and they wanted to get involved. And so we had over 30 of my classmates got involved.
Oh, wow.
6 faculty at Stanford came on board as mentors, advisors, investors. So.
Okay. Well, we have a video that shows how Nuru works.
Sure.
So let's take a look at that, and we'll talk about it on the other side.
Great.
All right? Okay.
This is how Nuru works. When Nuru is invited into a community, they meet with local stakeholders to identify and focus on the most promising leaders, who are then mentored and equipped with essential skills. These local leaders identify their most pressing needs in the areas of hunger, the inability to withstand financial shocks, preventable disease and death, and a lack of quality education for children. Data is collected and a baseline is established for ongoing monitoring and evaluation. Local leaders are provided with extensive analysis of the world's top poverty-fighting interventions to evaluate against set criteria. They choose what will work best in their context and then mobilise their community into action. Successful local business people are recruited to start businesses to fund the poverty-fighting work. Nuru provides them with world-class training and access to new markets and capital. As their businesses grow, their increasing profits enable the work to spread to neighbouring regions. After 7 years, Nuru International's staff and funding exits, leaving behind a self-sustaining organisation owned and operated by local leaders who are equipped to innovate past challenges and rapidly scale throughout the country.
Jake, what I love about your business model is that you work with local leaders, first and foremost.
Absolutely.
And then secondly, you actually have them choose what model works best for their community, right?
That's
So
right.
it's sort of customized to what their needs are, and you take into consideration really what their community needs, right?
That's right. It's really important because what we found, I mean, we're based on the philosophy that a strong Ethiopian woman leader who is in this country is far better equipped to solve her long-term problems than I will ever be.
Right.
The key is actually just unlocking the potential in her and removing barriers from around her that are keeping her from realizing that potential. So our model focuses on leadership. And we have a process of co-creation where we design these programs with the local leaders. It's based on best practices and lessons learned from around the world that we all analyze together, but then they make the final selection on what the composite solution is going to look like, because they're best informed on what's going to work in that culture, in that context. What that does is it creates huge ownership and buy-in and leadership sustainability.
Right.
So that when we leave, these leaders can continue not only to implement and scale, but also innovate past challenges that they're going to meet along the way as these programs change and break, et cetera.
So give me an example of how it works and what's been done in a particular community so I get a visual sense of the success and what's actually implemented.
Sure. So I'll walk you through what it looks like for a family that works with Nuru. Okay, so you take Kenya or Ethiopia. We work with farmers who are in really desperate situations. So typically their kids suffer from a hunger season. Sometimes the kids get one meal a day for a period of 3 months. Really terrible situations. There's lack of access to any kind of quality health care. They're dying from stupid diseases like malaria, diarrhea, respiratory tract infections. In the schools, the children many times can't go to school because the parents can't pay the school fees. If they do go, it's very difficult for them to get good literacy training so they can actually learn to read. So the literacy levels are abysmal. So they're in these situations that are very desperate. The first thing Nuru does is we come in, we focus on, okay, the first thing we have to do is provide food security.
Yeah.
Right? So we work with the local leaders to design an agriculture program that could look like this. Providing a loan for high-quality fertilizer and seed, teaching them how to use it effectively, supervising them in the field to make sure that they're able to use it properly, and also give them advice as they hit challenges. Just by doing that, we can at least double their production. So now all of a sudden farmers on the same piece of land have enough food to be able to feed their families, and they have actually some left over to sell.
Right, so there's some income.
Exactly.
Right.
We provide a market linkage because many times there's no access to markets in these remote regions.
Right.
So the farmers get a fair price for their food as they sell it. Now they have income for the first time. So what do you do with the income? Now that's the second program, financial inclusion. We train them on the importance of savings. We provide savings mechanisms, access to microloans, so that they can actually, when shocks come to the family, economic shocks, they can dip into that savings account and pay for that. So they don't have to go to their food stores, sell all the food, and now they're back down in hunger again.
Right. So it's like financial planning.
Exactly, yeah.
In the most basic way, yeah.
That's exactly right, just like we would have here.
Sure.
And then next is our healthcare program. The reason we focus on healthcare is because the most common economic shock for a family in rural communities is if a child gets sick or if a mother dies during childbirth,
right.
You have to pay for funeral expenses or medical expenses. So if you can eliminate the really basic infectious diseases that are plaguing these villages, you can have a huge win and eliminate those economic shocks. Again, furthering the prosperity of the family.
Yep.
And then the final silo we work on is education. This is really about breaking the intergenerational cycle of poverty for these families. You know, we want, especially the young girls, to be able to make it all the way up to high school, to secondary school. And we found that the key lever in that research shows if kids can make it to a second grade reading level, the whole world opens up to them because they can do what's called read to learn. They can understand what they're learning in their other subjects, which allows them to test higher and begin to make it to higher grades in the high school.
Yeah, and girls being key,
I mean,
right?
girls are key. I mean, empowering women and girls, all of the research shows if you can empower women and girls to be able to get good, solid education and empower them with choices, economic choices, it's one of the key levers in eliminating extreme poverty in this region.
Well, Jake, let me ask you this. I mean, with this program, you must have seen amazing transformations in communities and families, right?
Absolutely.
Do you see that transformation taking place so that anger or that bitterness or that desperation starts dissipating and
Absolutely.
You know, you kind of see that there's a hope, you know, that this could actually make a difference worldwide?
Absolutely. You know, I see in these communities that we're working with, I see the desperation going away.
Yeah.
You know, I see for the first time, you know, individuals, families having hope for their future. These are brave, resourceful people who have tried for years to try to get their families out of these conditions, but they've been, the deck has been stacked against them just because of the GPS coordinates of where they've been born. You know, so with basic access to basic choices and basic resources, they're able to pull themselves out of these conditions, out of extreme poverty, and they're proud of it too. For the first time they have hope, they begin to think about things other than just survival, which is really important. You begin to think about good governance from your government, you know, and you begin to think about linking up with neighbors to make positive change in your community yourself. A lot of really positive things.
And going back to the issue of terrorism and the war on terrorism, do you think this is the way to try and, defeat that?
Absolutely. I think it's a big part of the equation. So, I think military solutions, there are evil people in this world. There's evil groups in this world. We need our military to be able to take care of that problem. However, as some of our senior military leaders have stated, we cannot kill our way out of this problem. It requires a more holistic solution. And there's a lot of very good conversations happening, not only in the U.S. government, but in the United Nations and the African Union, about how we need to build a more robust strategy around eliminating extreme poverty, around adding stability in some of the most fragile regions as a way to strip away a lot of the resources and recruiting grounds and logistic spaces of support for some of these extremist groups.
Yeah. And we should mention that this is not about a handout.
No.
This is about empowering them, teaching people, and then leaving eventually.
Right.
And then they become independent, and as the video said, that they spread their information to other regions, right?
That's right. Absolutely. I mean, this is not a Westerner solution.
Yeah.
Like I said in the very beginning, this philosophy is based on the fact that the individuals that we're working with are brave, resourceful people who are far more capable than we are of solving their problems. We're just a catalyst. So exit is very important. We think it's really important that Nuru International, the Western organization, must leave in order for true long-lasting success to happen.
Right, right. Well, Jake, it's great stuff that you guys are doing with Nuru. Congratulations.
Thank you.
I know you have expansion plans.
Yeah.
What other areas are you about to go to?
So we have, the last 7 years have been really about proving the model works. And so we did that in relatively stable places, Kenya and Ethiopia. Now that the model is working, we're really getting ready to tackle what I believe was my original vision, which is taking this into some of the toughest places in the world. We want to show the world that we can disrupt violent extremism, disrupt terrorism through the Nuru model and the Nuru approach. So we're specifically looking at different regions that are very volatile. So we're looking at northeast Nigeria, we're looking at southern Somalia, looking at eastern DRC. So those are some of the top regions that we're looking at for our next project, because what we want to be able to demonstrate in a big splash way, that if you do this work in a sustainable way, it makes for a very fertile ground for a more holistic strategy to counter violent extremism, that it's an important component to the equation. And then once we can prove this with data, then our goal is to scale that up kind of globally.
Yeah. I think you're on to something for sure, but congratulations on all the success thus far. But I think you got a healthy road ahead of you with this project, so good luck to you.
Thanks so much.
All right.
Appreciate it.
When we come back, a simple recalibration of charitable giving is having an impact on global poverty that may surprise you. Stay right there. When you give to a charity fighting to rid the world of poverty, how much impact does your donated dollar really have on a single individual living in abject poverty? Well, in many cases, not much. One organization is out to change that and how we all think about charitable giving. Michael Fay is the co-founder and chairman of Give Directly, a top-ranked international charity that advocates for direct giving to people with the most need. The Guardian writes that Give Directly sent shockwaves through the charity sector when it introduced the idea of making cash transfers directly to the poor. Fay's model essentially eliminates the NGO middleman by quickly and efficiently transferring funds from donors right into the hands of those who need it most. Michael Fay joins us now from New York City to discuss how he's changing the charity landscape and why it's working so well. Michael, welcome to Full Frame.
Thanks, May. Pleasure to be here.
Well, Michael, this is definitely a unique concept. It's pretty much cutting out the middleman, as I just said, and there's no strings to this. The donor directly sends the money to the person in need. When you first came up with this idea and you started sharing the concept, did people sort of question the whole idea?
Yeah, I think it was a mix. I think there are folks in this sector, the development sector, that were quite familiar with the idea. It wasn't a new idea, and there was quite a bit of evidence for cash when we got started. And those folks were really quite supportive. Now, I think there is the general public, and there is skepticism about cash in general. There's also a lot of skepticism about whether people would actually give in this way.
And so tell me, why does direct cash work?
Well, I think you're really putting trust into the poor and allowing them to make decisions on their own behalf. I think if I'm sitting in a room in New York or DC or London, it's going to be a lot harder for me to understand what that recipient or poor person needs than for themselves to know what they need.
Well, let's talk about how it actually works then. Let's start from the donor's end. How does a donor go about deciding who the money goes to, and how does that transaction work?
Yeah, so this is quite easy. It's like going to any other website. I think if you go to our website, givedirectly.org, you have a choice of which country to give to, and right now you can give to either Kenya or Uganda. Okay. There are slightly different efficiency ratios for each, so 91 cents on each dollar gets to the poor in Kenya and about 85 cents in Uganda.
Okay.
You select your option and go from there.
91 cents and you said 85 cents, that's pretty good in terms of how much actually goes to the person in need.
We think so. And we think even more basically simply asking the question of other organizations, how much of the dollar that I'm donating reaches the final recipient, is a first step.
That's right. Yeah, I think a lot of folks wonder about that whenever they give to a charity. All right, let's then talk about the recipient. They receive the money directly, and how does that take place?
That's right. So the first step is finding the recipient, and to be eligible for Give Directly, you need to be extremely poor. A Give Directly recipient, on average, is living on about 65 cents a day.
Wow.
We then go through a number of back checks and follow-ups to make sure that the person is actually poor and who we think they are. Once that process is complete, we enroll them in the system. We register them by providing them a SIM card for mobile money, and then transfer them money. They get a text, and they could either pick up that money at a local agent or hold that money and save it on their phone.
And you just mentioned, Michael, that you go through a lot of background checks to make sure that this person is legitimate. You've never had an issue with fraud or somebody trying to misuse these funds?
I think everybody working in the sector has had an issue with fraud, and the real question is how you minimize that.
Yeah.
We had one which we've been very public about, and think it's important to be public about these things in Uganda, where we lost about 2% of a budget. The question is, how quickly do you catch it, and how quickly do you adapt to it?
Okay, and how were you able to manage that then?
So it's a combination of management and technology. So we use everything from satellite image to automated fraud alerts to feedback mechanisms with staff compensation to prevent fraud going forward.
Okay, so that's the fraud element, but what about, you know, these are real recipients of this money, but how do you ensure that that person doesn't then go and misuse the funds? I mean, they may be poor and they may have needs, but what if they go and spend the money on alcohol or drugs or other things that obviously aren't being used? You know, they're using the money for other things that aren't needed.
Well, it's interesting, and I think for a long time we've thought that we needed to put constraints on the poor for what they could use the money for. And the reality is that poverty itself puts constraints on the recipient. If you're living in abject poverty on 65 cents a day, when you get a transfer of cash, your first thought is not, how do I go have fun? Which bar should I go to? Right. It's how can I make my family's life better? And even how can I survive?
Right. Right. Well, tell me then, Michael, you know, you guys have the proof. You have the stories of how this works. Give me some examples of how lives have been changed through this mechanism that you've created.
There are examples of everything. There's lots of recipients that have bought motorbikes to start taxi businesses. Recipients will use the money to send their kids to school. A fair number of recipients use it for the simplest of things that we take for granted, putting a roof on their heads, which not only obviously improves the dignity of their lives, but is actually a great investment for them. And the list goes on from there.
Michael, why hasn't someone done this before? You mentioned earlier that this isn't something totally new, but really it's not that commonplace. So do you think this is something that's going to continue to catch on?
I sure hope so, and it's interesting. I think people talk about Give Directly as something new and leading this movement towards direct giving and cash transfers. And the reality is that many people were doing it before. The government of Brazil, the government of Mexico, and many others were doing cash transfer programs, which actually provided the evidence upon which Give Directly is based. Without those programs, we wouldn't have known that cash worked.
Right.
What people haven't done, and where I think Give Directly has really pushed it, is opening that up to the general public and saying, let's go beyond the large institutions and governments and allow anyone in the general public to give directly.
And I guess I should ask you, Michael, how is it going in terms of donations? Are you seeing a steady rise in the number of donations and donors participating in this program?
We've been delighted. We recently crossed the $100 million mark.
Wow.
Of cumulative donations. So it's just been a tremendous amount of support for folks to the poor. And I think it's folks that have placed a real priority on evidence. It's folks trusting the poor. And I think it's growing.
That's $100 million. That is incredible, Michael. Well, let's talk about how much an average donation, how much of a difference it can make. $50, let's say you donate to Uganda. What's that $50 going to do?
This is transformative for people. And again, to put this in context, people are living on 65 cents a day. So for the price of coffee each morning, you could basically double their income.
Jeez.
For $50, you can buy enough maize to last a family probably for about 2 months. You could buy several pigs. It really goes quite far abroad in these countries.
All right. Well, Michael, thank you so much for sharing your story about Give Directly. Sounds like you guys are doing incredible work, so keep it up.
I appreciate it, May. Thanks so much for having me.
You're welcome. All right, we'll be right back with this week's Full Frame Close-Up. In 1994, a Florida prison started a small zoo with a group of ducks. Eventually, people began dropping off unwanted pets. Several years later, however, the zoo was nearly shut down after being cited with violations. That is, until one woman stepped in to save the animals and the inmates who care for them. 10 years later, the zoo now has 150 animals, and as full-frame contributor Jim Spellman explains, it's a thriving program that's good for the community, good for the animals, and great for the inmates.
Good morning. How are you today? Morning, morning. All right, we got everybody.
The sun is barely up in the Florida Keys, and these inmates at the Monroe County Jail are on the move, gearing up for work detail.
So it'll be exciting to see that.
But this is no chain gang.
Hey, come on.
These inmates help run a zoo.
What's up, buddy?
At the jail. Prisoners feed the animals,
Okay.
play with them, and take care of the facility.
All right.
Seth Beckman is serving 6 months on drug charges. He moved to Florida shortly before his arrest.
I heard the cocaine here was pretty good, so I ended up having some cocaine on me, and I got pulled over and got charged for possession of cocaine.
He had no experience working with animals before coming to the farm. But he soon fell in love with his new companions.
Whenever I'm inside, of course you got to deal with all the other inmates that are in here. A bunch have different personalities, and it's just, it's kind of like a mess, really, you're juggling with, you know, and it's just, sometimes, whenever I'm out here, I get away from it all. I'm at peace, really, out here. It's kind of like my escape while I'm in jail.
Adam Corzin was convicted on drug charges and is back in jail after violating parole.
Just we usually come in the morning and feed them all and, you know, hang out with them for a little while.
Working with the animals is a welcome relief from his time inside the walls of the jail.
Upstairs, I tend to be withdrawn a lot. Just stick to yourself, simply because of the environment that you're around. So you kind of have to. Downstairs, you can be more open. And then you got the animals, which, you know, bring out the best in you, I guess.
All inmates who work on the farm must be nonviolent offenders who haven't committed crimes against animals. Jeannie Sealander, Farmer Jeannie to the inmates, runs the program.
So when did you come to work here?
I came here 10 years ago in 2006.
What was it like then?
It was a little bit barren. There were only about 20 animals. There was no grass out here. There was no grazing fence. There were no trees. So I've tried to make improvements as I go, and we're up to about 150 animals now.
All the animals here have been abandoned, abused, confiscated, or donated.
A lot of the animals here, like this goat French fry, begin as pets. When they become too big and too unruly for their owners to take care of, they end up here.
There are boars and ducks, a skunk and a lemur, snakes, and a sloth.
So this is our aviary, where all of our exotic birds and our sloth live, and I see the sloth over there waiting for me now. Hi, Mo. So we're going to give breakfast to Mo the sloth.
Mo is a farm favorite. He eats these biscuits soaked in water, sometimes sharing with his feathered friends. For dessert, it's an ear of corn. Sloths can live 25 to 30 years. After 5 years, his owners decided Mo was too much to handle. Now he makes appearances at community events and is a favorite with visitors.
And people get to come up and pet him and interact with him, which is pretty amazing because most people would never get to see an animal like this, let alone as up close as we allow them to.
What do the prisoners get out of working here?
Well, they learn compassion from working with the animals. It also gives them a purpose, and it makes them feel like they're doing something worthwhile. And some of them don't feel like they matter, and some of them have hard lives, just like these animals have had hard lives, so they really identify with them. I've even heard them tell the animals before. I've heard the inmates say, "You're in jail just like me." So they really identify with these animals that have had difficult lives.
This is Snowflake and Arabella, the alpacas.
Hi, buddy, come on.
There you go.
More than 700 inmates have worked in the program over the years. They bond with Farmer Jeannie and the animals so much that many return to visit and even volunteer once they are released.
They're actually pretty unique animals. I like them a lot.
It just makes you appreciate things a little better. You know, just when we come down here, these animals like depend on us. I mean, they know we're here. They'll walk up to the gate and wait for you to be fed, and it's just makes you realize how much beauty there is in the world.
Farmer Jeannie hopes more jails will develop similar programs and spread that beauty far beyond the prison walls. For Full Frame, Jim Spellman, Stock Island, Florida.
Well, that's it for this week. Join the conversation with us on social media. We are CCTV America on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. And now you can watch Full Frame on our new mobile app, available worldwide on any smartphone for free. Get the latest news headlines and connect to us on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and Weibo. Search CCTV America on your app store to download today. All of our interviews can still also be found online at cctv-america.com. And let us know what you'd like us to take Full Frame next. Simply email us at fullframe@cctv-america.com. Until then, I'm Mayley in Los Angeles. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.